Good evening, everybody. This is Matt Webster again with the Christian Journey series. Today, I kind of wanted to go over next character on the list, and then I'll go back on the next video with the continuation of the dream that I had mentioned in my last one. So, this next character is from a show called One Piece. His name is Sanji Vinsmoke. There's a lot to go over with this character in this show. So, the show itself is a show about pursuing one's dreams. Um, Almost all the characters in the main cast of the characters, that is, particularly with the crew, the main character, has had a very, very tragic backstory um, in a world where the government's controlling everything and they're just doing generally terrible things to people. Um, there's a lot to go over with that could be said about our own world. Um, Sanji, as a character, is a very interesting character. Um, this is One Piece, and this is the character Sanji. Um, when we first meet Sanji, he's a cook who has an adopted father aboard a pirate cruise ship that also cooks, which is something to highlight in the show. Pirates are actually the good guys, which is kind of funny. Um, Sanji comes from a very interesting background, though. When you get much later on in the series, you find out that he actually grew up as kind of a science experiment, part of what was called the Germa Kingdom. Uh, Sanji's whole childhood is traumatic in respect to like his overall well-being. Um, when you first meet him, you can see that he has an abusive childhood. His dad's pressuring him to be this soldier that he's not really meant to be. He's more of a gentle, loving soul. And his other children, because of the scientific experiments that they run on him, all have a lack of emotions and stuff. At least the boys. His sister, on the other hand, did have some emotions and stuff like that. But his father regarded him as worthless trash, a pathetic failure. Even so much so to the point when his own mother died, he wasn't allowed to show any kind of emotion. And his dad locked him in a jail cell with a mask and stuff on him, and it just was something like, even watching the show is kind of hard to watch. Um, Even though it's just a cartoon, I know maybe people don't get that, but for me, like, this character reminded me a lot of my own childhood. There was a lot of expectations put upon me that weren't expectations of most children. Kind of growing up in a broken household and seeing how a broken relationship between your two parents can cause a rift, and then your dad not really being there and supportive and just not being present. Um, Now, a little bit more about Sanji. As I mentioned, he's a cook. There's quite a few episodes where when people are in need of food and just needing to be taken care of, Sanji is one of the first people to jump in and like do things for others, and it's not out of anything other than just love, which is something else to highlight with his character. His character is very much so a truly loving character. Um, Sometimes he's a little rough around the edges, and even his closest friend on the crew, which is funny, is also his rival. Um, they butt heads, but there's like a love-hate relationship between them that bonds them, uh, that makes them a lot stronger together. Um, Sanji also tends to prioritize women and children when he's fighting against the bad guys in the show. He's also a bit perverted at times, so much so that women in the show tend to see him as just a pervert, which kind of changes later on when he meets one particular woman whose name is Charlotte Pudding, which is where we get his backstory from, is in this same arc. Uh, when he first meets this woman, it's an arranged marriage, and it's supposed to be a setup to kill him and his entire family. Um, and then, like, on the day of their wedding, because there's this big plot to kill all of them, Sanji pulls back the veil on her eyes. Now, having to give a little backstory to this character, Charlotte Pudding is also someone who was bullied by her entire family for having a third eye. She's called freaky looking and ugly and all sorts of stuff. Well, when Sanji pulls back the veil, she's expecting to be called evil and whatever. She wants a reason to justify to kill him. But instead, she's met with surprise where Sanji is literally entranced and it's like, wow, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And with that in mind, she drops the gun that she's going to use to kill him, and she can't believe that she's actually being told she's beautiful and she's been told she's ugly her entire life. Um, which I think kind of highlights too, when you meet somebody that's worth your while, or just someone that you think's a good person deep down, a lot of times everything else that's happened in life, every other person that has thought that a person was ugly, everything that you've grown to expect changes in an instant. And I think God works that way too, because a lot of times we can be blind to things like love and that, but also the moment you meet the right person, it's going to feel different from anything you've ever felt before or experienced. I've had moments where I thought I met the right one, and I'm not entirely sure that I have at this point. I will say that there have been moments where particular people were very different from anyone I'd ever met, and it's that moment of feeling like the person is different, I feel like, is when you start to feel that connection that God needs you to feel. Whether or not, person ends up being that person is a totally different story. The other thing with this show is that it highlights free will a lot, because a lot of the characters' free will has been taken away, and because of the way the government operates. But these people fight against the oppression and the evils of the world, and like they come together and make a stand, which I think is something that nowadays the world is in desperate need of. I think that it doesn't matter what you're looking at politically, especially in the US. I mean, we may live in the freest country, but I think we've all been fed a lie that we're really free when we're not. And the thing with that is that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. I think honestly, if people really want to break free, they're going to need to work together and put their differences aside. And we're going to have to start looking beyond left and right and anything else that's on opposing sides. Kind of going over Sanji more, I kind of noticed something with this list in particular, is that a lot of these characters in the fourth spot are people who struggle with identity, and it's like they want to forget their past. And I will say this, sometimes there's a thing about like when you become new in God and like you're like a new creation. However, I think there might be a misconception sometimes. I think that there's a possibility that sometimes you go from, especially on my own journey, you go from what you were in God to leaving God, kind of like myself, and then you're trying to find your way back to being the person you were when you were with God. There was a point in my life where I was fighting odds that were ridiculous. And I don't mean that in like some physical fighting way. I mean it more in like a spiritual, emotional sense, which is I was going up against bullies and stuff and constantly fighting for friends who didn't fight back. And it was hard. It kind of left me bitter at times because I would get frustrated with the fact that they didn't fight back. Eventually, I gave up, and like, I think deep down inside, I knew that was wrong to give up. Because I kind of just rolled over and let things happen at that point. And I don't think I was ever okay with myself doing it. And it's taken me years to get back to wanting to fight the system, wanting to do what's right. And one of the reasons why this character I think is so important on this list is that he's fighting back against the world with the one thing that makes sense to fight back with, and that's love. Albeit, he's a little perverted in the show. He's still generally someone that cares and is chivalrous and kind to people who need it. Another thing that this character struggles with is that everyone's always saying that his emotions make him weak and stuff like that. And I don't believe that at all in men. I do think we need to have some control over our emotions. However, I think being able to show empathy and love, which is something that people often ostracize men for, and having any like sign of like side that where you show tears and like you have breaking points as a man that most people don't understand. In all honesty, I'd kind of reached one of those breaking points recently myself, and it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And it's really funny, I used to cry a lot more than I did this last time, and this time it just feels like it was more angry, which is strange for myself. I think I had to acknowledge that I had anger that maybe I didn't realize I had. And I guess more than anything, another thing with the show is I'm looking for the right friends. And I want the friends that aren't going to run when things get hard, aren't going to walk away just because things weren't exactly as they imagined. And even if they aren't here right now, I plan on continuing to fight. I think that the world needs more men to fight. Anyways, I hope this video finds some of you well. And I hope you can kind of understand and see like how One Piece again can be used by God. Anyways, next time.